So I've always wanted to try out the Battlefield series and never got round to doing so I thought I'd check out the most recent entry in the franchise, Battlefield 2042. Now this reason being is because first I wanted to see the most updated version of the series, which would of course be the newest game, and then later on I'll go back to the older entries and compare them, which I think will be a lot of fun, but also because 2042 released back in November 2021 with mixed reviews, let's say, and a good amount of complaints from fans. And a common theme I see when I do these updated reviews on a game is that comparing them to when they launched, especially if they released not so great, and almost all the time the company does actually take the time and effort to improve the game. Many examples being like Cyberpunk, No Man's Sky, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and many others as well. And from what I've heard, the same rule applies with Battlefield 2042. So without further ado, let's start off with the overall gameplay and premise of this game for anyone that doesn't know. So the Battlefield series is a first-person shooter, multiplayer game. Funny enough, the first ever multiplayer review on the channel. Another big reason why I wanted to play it. I tend to stick to single players and more story-driven games because there's way more to talk about and go into detail with, whereas many of you probably already know what Battlefield is. It's more so the state of the game and how it is now more than anything, but I thought I'd touch over it anyway. So similar to Call of Duty, which I really enjoyed, some more than others, but Battlefield has more of a focus on larger maps and bigger weapons, just like a war, which was exactly what the older games were like, many based on World War I and II, whereas 2042 is way more modern, and if you haven't guessed it, it is set in 2042. And unlike the basic COD matches, Battlefield implements many vehicles and massive jets and machinery weapons, and COD has definitely included this style in their ground war game modes, and they seem to be pushing it more and more with each COD release. The main game modes of Battlefield 2042 are Breakthrough, Conquest, Portal and Hazard Zone. Now Breakthrough and Conquest are actually included and described as the all-out warfare, and that is what it is. So Conquest is a giant game mode that takes place on large-scale maps, made for a sandbox mode. It's the main game mode of the entire series, where you're ordered to take control of the points of the map, as well as of course taking down the opposite team. And both teams start off the game with a number of tickets, which basically is the number of respawns they will get. The match ends when a team's ticket number is reduced to 0. Again, all by capturing control points and killing enemies. Breakthrough, I suppose it's kind of similar. It's whoever holds the most positions of the map, as it's split up into sections, basically like domination in COD, but like everything, just on a much larger scale and more players. Now 2042 did originally release with a ton of bugs and just terrible performance overall, almost as if it hadn't been tested beforehand, and in fact I was genuinely considering buying the game back then, but like many others, from what I heard, I skipped over it, and this was probably the biggest complaint of the game. But even back then, I think some people still thought DICE would slowly improve the game, even if it is just the bugs, by putting out some patches and actually provide something better, however long that would be. Now it's safe to say the vast majority of the bugs have all been fixed, and I should hope so because it has been 2.5 years. Some of them, and again I didn't experience firsthand, but even one bug was enough to put me and many others off the game. A massive one that affected gun recoil, which made it incredibly difficult to aim down sight accurately and just handle your weapon basically, which in a game that has a huge focus on gunplay, this almost made it unplayable. And that's just one example. There were tons of broken parts of the game at launch, and the performance has been immensely improved over the last 2 years, including the FPS, because I know that was another big issue. Now you choose from a selection of operators, all having their own unique abilities, gadgets and loadouts, and you can edit the weapons to some extent, with some you have unlocked from leveling up, but the operators themselves are all categorized into assault, support, engineer and recon. I'd say there's a great variety, and some are of course better than others, but it's all sort of down to personal preference, and they all allow to alter your gameplay and try something new. They can be switched out when you respawn as well, and just the abilities and gadgets are really what make them. You can get quite creative with them, like for example with Casper, who's part of the recon section. His main gadget is a drone that can spot enemies, and that as its main purpose isn't that bad. It's a good advantage, but what's funny is that you can place down C5s on top of the drone, which they could have easily not allowed it to do, and I believe before they did actually alter it, because before you could detonate the C5s by yourself by simply crashing the drone, whereas now you need someone else to detonate them at the right time, which I think is honestly better and way more strategic. So then, as you can see by the gameplay, me and my friend had a lot of fun pulling this off, where I flew the drone around to blow up some random tanks, but obviously we had to time it right. So just stuff like that, the gameplay is very fun for sure. I mean, from the overall scale of the games, like Conquest 64, which has 128 players in total, and the huge variety of abilities and gadgets from the array of operators, as well as the many vehicles that can be used in gameplay. And just like the operators, the vehicles are all categorized into light, armor, attack and transport, which is pretty self-explanatory. Light are the most common ones to be found and spawn in, which are all just traversal and aren't overly strong. And then armored are stronger and include some form of weapon like a turret. Then attack are the jets and helis that have missiles and machine guns attached to them. And I believe transport is just a traversal heli without any weapons included. Now the maps of the game are okay. I heard a lot of them have been reworked since launch, because before they were just way too spacious and had less areas for cover, which is another bonus and shows they have been improving the gameplay. They aren't amazing, some are significantly better than others, and with the many seasons released there have been new ones as well. But again, the spacing is just too much on a lot of them, with way too much empty space. And then on top of that, it's not even like it's balanced throughout, because there'll be one or a few giant structures that tower over everything. That allows for a lot of campers for a start, and just completely ruining the movement of the map, with players having a huge disadvantage in high ground with little cover in open areas, which isn't great when there will always be a capture point on these giant buildings, maybe even multiple ones, that you'll have to infiltrate to, and most of the time it isn't a great experience. Now, as I mentioned, some maps are better, but the consistency is just off, and I think most of them should either be reworked again or just entirely removed out of the game. What I will mention is that the overall look of the environments and game itself is quite beautiful. For example, I love the sheer scale and look of Exposure from an appearance perspective, but also I think it's the best map in the game. It's basically a huge landslide that reveals a hidden bunker beneath it that runs throughout the cliff. It allows for a lot of fun, and it is actually somewhat balanced in spacing. I just love the design, if only all of them were like that. And I think that is where I end my review of Battlefield 2042 in 2024, and I can't lie, I had a lot of fun playing the game, and I will continue to play it in fact, and who knows how long that'll be for. But the fact that the game is going for £7 on Steam right now, it's 100% worth the money, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it, especially with them improving the game since its launch day. And as covered, it still does have its flaws that may still get changed over time, who knows. But as it stands, Battlefield 2042 is worth playing 2.5 years later. It's a whole lot better with friends as well, at least with my experience. So if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below. And if you like single player and story driven games, but I guess multiplayer now as well, then that's what this channel is all about. I have many reviews on various titles with a playlist of a series I've done in the description. And if you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to many perks, then click the join button below, or there'll also be a link in the description. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. That was Battlefield 2042, and bye bye.